Can you just explain like what a flâneur is or a flâneuse, just for so we can kind of catch the audience up?
It's a person that walks aimlessly in a city, so without a purpose, only to discover the city, only to enjoy it, for the exploration's sake. To give you some context, Walter Benjamin wrote in the archives, in the Arcades project, a lot about the flâneur, and also how it came into existence, for example, in the 19th century Paris, and how people would just walk near the shops and just enjoy the city, and then there was this shift towards a more consumerist world, and all this walking only for the exploration's sake shifted towards consumerism, and you walk to shop, so you always had a goal to do something in the city, in comparison to how it was maybe before, when you would just go and for the pure aesthetic pleasure of seeing a city.
And that would be any time, because that would be, say, like for lunch, or would that be like weekend walks? And so I'm trying to like hone down, was this like maybe one person, or was this more of like it just kind of happened and emerged, and then someone put a definition on it saying that's what a flâneur does, to walk aimlessly? And because you said Paris was one of the places that kind of it
yes, Paris and also London. I think also Poe wrote in The Man of the Crowd about the flâneur, so it's a short story. Okay. I don't know, this phenomenon is very interesting, because before, I think in the 18th, 19th century, a flâneur was usually a man, and a man of means, so a rich man who would have the time to be idle.
Right.
Because workers would not have, the time. But that doesn't mean that they were not also flâneurs. They would not also, find, pleasure and enjoyment in just enjoying a city and walking around.
Can you be a flâneur in the countryside?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
I think even though I see the flâneur as more like a cosmopolitan figure, because in a city you have, the hustle and the bustle of a city, and you have a lot of novelty, and you see a lot of people, and you can actually disappear in a crowd.
Sure.
And that's also, I think, a trait of the flâneur, the fact that you're just disappearing into the crowd, and you're one of the crowd.
That's interesting. And so nowadays it seems like you can, I've always gotten the best advice from people that have traveled a lot to then like almost get lost, and it seems like that's kind of along the way of a flâneur, is that like it's okay to not have a specific point A to point B. It's okay and you can really experience the city. I mean, I've almost tried to do that in my travels in the last couple of years now, and it seems like a very fruitful thing, because then you go into different shops, or go into a corner that you didn't think you would before, or something. So like, what are some of the not just aesthetic but maybe personal things that a person gets from that? Like, is it fulfillment? Is it just adventure? Is it those kind of things?
I think it's the pleasure of novelty.
Okay.
Because you can always see a city with fresh new eyes. I mean, even now, after living 2 years in Switzerland, I think I visited Zurich many times, I can still, find novelty and see something that I haven't seen before. Even a bookstore or a cafe or, a sign. I think it's really about the relationship you can have with a city, in the sense that a city is more than, just a place for, consumption and entertainment. You can also discover it from many points of view, from a historical perspective, trying to understand the culture, the people. I'm also very interested in the design of cities, and that's also in relation to the flâneur. I mean, some cities have this beautiful walkability, as in Zurich. He also told me that when you arrive here, what a beautiful city it is, and that changed your mood, I think, and also how you perceive the city, and also how you walked in the city. So I think this is also something, I think that's why I'm so attracted to the flâneur concept, because this also means that we can explore places for thinking and for walking and make them more beautiful for somebody to enjoy, to discover, to be inspired, for the right things, or for a conversation, in building the atmosphere, of a conversation, or simply just making your day a bit more beautiful.
Right. So the design of cities is very paramount in this. Okay. So if say so I want to kind of go back to like you said something you pointed out of historically it was a lot of men of well-means. So was there like women, like how did women get into, like how did the Flâneuse come about? How was there one woman who loved to do it, or was it more of an emergence, again, a phenomenon that like just so happened that women were now doing the same thing that men were doing?
I think women were always flaneurs, but they were seen through the male gaze, to the male perspective. For example, Charles Baudelaire, a French poet, wrote a poem. I think it's called Une passante, so a passerby, but the female passerby. And the way he describes her in that poem is like more or less like a prostitute or a woman of the night. Because women around the time, if you go at that hour or, without a male companion, you would have been perceived as a prostitute, but maybe she was only a flaneuse. So that's actually how I also started my dissertation, with that kind of, perspective that the flaneuse also existed, not only the flaneur, because everybody can walk, everybody can enjoy a city, and find pleasure. Of course, if you are a worker versus a wealthy person, that would not allow you to have that kind of luxury all the time, but that doesn't mean that you are not also a flaneur. So I think it was about the perspective in that sense, because women were flaneurs, but it's also who sees them as being flaneurs or not.
It's not in a vacuum. It really still, you're in an environment of a city. And,
exactly.
And the cultural and the baggage, etc.
Yes,
comes with
it's
that.
cultural. It's, for example, in New York, in the beginning of the 20th century, there were some parts in the cities where if you would walk as a woman, you would have been perceived as a prostitute, just because there were some areas where you would not walk alone.
Especially without a male companion or with groups or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And my point is that the flaneuse always existed also in literature. Women were enjoying walking. It was not so permissive. And even now, I think now things have changed, but even now in some countries, you would get a lot of harassment as a solo traveler. And as a woman solo traveler, or maybe also as a male in some parts of the world. And I was also curious about that, how that changed, how much freedom we have now as women in a city. Because I also had my fair share of harassment, for example, in Romania as a kid and as a teenager, and that changed in Berlin, and I felt some kind of freedom in Berlin because it's a huge city and I had more freedom as a woman, I think, and I wasn't harassed. And that also changed in Switzerland, because here people are also I find a lot of safety in Switzerland at night.
So you don't really feel that pressure of the city, not just like of gazing eyes, but then safety, etc.
Exactly. Okay. And also, as you said, there are not so many gazing eyes. I mean, here you can just blend into the crowd as
just
a flaneur.
Another person walking.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
And that gives us a lot of freedom also to discover and to have a connection with the city and to look at things in a different way. I mean, actually to slow down and, and by that I mean looking at the architecture, looking at the people, trying to ask yourself questions, finding places for thinking, because even walking in a city, can influence your thinking heavily, can have a huge impact on how you think and, the ideas that come into your mind just by walking.
Sure. But then again, I like how you're saying it is to slow down, because you could keep, walk around and walk around and walk around, but then never really like ground yourself and then take it in. Like what did you just experience? What did you just like see?